Hello, welcome to the video. I'm Melissa, I write books, and I am procrastinating writing. Thank you for asking. So something that as a new writer, I was really interested in, especially as I got to writing my second book. If you don't know, I feel like I have not talked about this in a while, and I've gained more subscribers since then. So I am currently working on my fourth book, and I've also written short stories and screenplays and all that other stuff too. And what I've realized is as I was writing specifically that second book, it's really hard to know when you're done because you don't know how far you're supposed to go. I just remember thinking after I did one revision, I was like, am I good now? Do I just start pushing this out into the world, or do I get another round of readers, or do I don't know, how many times do I go through it? How do I know if it's done? And the real answer to that is every book is different and everybody requires a different number of drafts. And each book, every book that I've written, the process is different. But what would have been helpful is to just have some sort of guideline or answer or hint as to other people who have done this and gotten a book query ready or publication ready or whatever. Well, how many rounds did they do? What did those drafts look like? What different things did they focus on in each draft? So that's what this video is. I'm gonna kind of talk through, at this point in time, what my process is. And I'm also gonna talk about how long did each stage of the process take for different books. And yeah, I kind of go from idea to query ready, essentially, because I'm pursuing traditional publishing at the moment, currently in those trenches. Okay, just as an overall summary, I think of it less in drafts and more in stages. Generally 4 stages. The first stage is to make it exist. The second stage is to make it make sense. The third stage is to make it beautiful, and the last stage is to make it right. I don't think that all my drafts fall completely in one section. Sometimes I do it a little bit out of order, but that's kind of generally how I think about it. So the first step, make it exist. For me, this is outlining and the zero draft or the rough draft or the first draft, whatever the first thing you put on the page is before you do any sort of revision is that stage. The first thing I actually do is I do 3 or 4 discovery outlines. So I usually have an idea ready to go. The way I come up with my ideas is very random. At this point, I have kind of a formula. I think about tropes that I like. I think about things that I would enjoy reading and writing, things that already exist that I enjoy reading and writing. I usually have some sort of image of that would be a cool scene, or that would be a cool twist, or that would be a cool relationship, and I take from that too. So for example, the way I got the idea for Gas Station, which is technically about a hostage negotiator, sort of, I saw this TikTok of someone falling out of a building. I know. And they were caught by a SWAT person. A SWAT person caught them. That's all the video was. It was actually very horrific. Why did I watch that? Anyway, my sick and twisted mind said, what if that was turned into a romance? What if that turned into a rom-com? That was all the initial idea was. And so then from there, I'm who would be is it a SWAT person or a hostage negotiator? And what if they met during a hostage negotiation? And the original iteration was that the main, it turns out to be the guy, but the main person who's in the hostage situation had been in a bunch of randomly stumbled across a bunch of different robberies. He just keeps being in robberies, and I was that's kind of funny. If he just kept getting in random robberies, and then by the one that starts the book, he's oh, this again? I'm so over this. And then she, who's a hostage negotiator, just happens to be at this bank that's being robbed, and then she notices that he's super chill about it, and then they have some sort of connection. That was the initial idea that I got literally just from watching that TikTok. So that was all I had. And I also knew I wanted to incorporate some sort of I really love a single dad. At the time, I really, really loved a single dad. But I didn't actually want him to have this past relationship baggage at this point. So I figured that's another element that was kind of going around in my head. And then I also had oh, I just love people getting kidnapped in books because of the like tension and the relationship drama that it brings, right? So once I had a little bit of information, I also knew I wanted it to be a dual POV book and to have elements of thriller and elements of romance in it. That's what I had, and then I opened a new document and I just like set a timer and I wrote like essentially like a synopsis, discovery outline, like here's the possible summary of a book. And then I would open a new document and write a whole different one where it goes a totally different direction. And I did this like 3 or 4 times to kind of flesh out the bones of the idea to see like, where could this go? Where do I want it to go? Because as I'm doing this, I'm like, at first, I had this idea that he would be this journalist. And then I realized like, what does the bulk of a book about a journalist look like? And it's a lot of like investigating and digging around and lying. And I was like, I don't want that to be what the book is like about. You have to think when you're thinking about the idea of like, what will the bulk of this book be about? Like what will actually be happening on the page in this book? And is that something I'm interested in actually exploring? Because there were a lot of different avenues when I was writing this book where I was like, oh, like she could be undercover, and then I'm like, do I really want to write scenes of this girl being undercover? I'm giving a lot of different scenarios here and not telling you what actually happens. Like, okay, what are different scenes about a person being undercover, and do I want to write those scenes? Or I thought about him being part of a gang or something, like him being involved in the drug world. And I'm like, okay, what would a scene look like that happens in? And do I feel comfortable writing that? Like, is that something I want to explore? Am I the right person to explore that, you know? And so that's kind of what those discovery outlines would do, or summaries or blurbs or whatever you want to call it, is it just kind of like helps you see, okay, this is what my book is about. What does that actually look like? Where does that go? What does the climax of a book that's about that look like? What are other books that are similar? So that's the first thing I do. And then I kind of take all of those and I pick like, okay, I like these elements of that. I like that he has this sister that he takes care of here. I like that she has this family situation. Like I like all these things from these different versions. And so then I would put all of that into another summary. And so once I have this book summary where I'm like, okay, I like the scenes that are here. I think this twist is interesting. I think like generally the story is there. Then I take the Save the Cat outline and I start plugging in this book idea, this like plot that I have, and I plug that into the beats of the scene. So I see like, what is the opening image? What is what happens in Act 1? What happens in Act 2? And it helps me to actually go bigger. So I go, here's all the things that happen in Act 1, here's all the things that happen in Act 2, here's all the things that happen in Act 3. And then I kind of reorder them. And I'm saying this like it's super easy, but it actually becomes really difficult. Another thing to think about with this kind of thing is motivation. So making sure that like, does it actually make sense for my character to be doing that? Like, what is the motive for them to do that? So keeping the goal, motivation, conflict in the front of your mind as I'm plugging in these things into the Save the Cat is also something I consider. Like, does it make sense for this to come next? Like, what's motivating that, right? And this process, the idea dumping took about a week. The sorting it into Save the Cat, I think probably took 2 weeks, but it was a weird time. I was also quitting my job at the time. So it took about a month to do that. Well, and also it was difficult because it was a dual POV book, so both of my characters hit all of those plot points and hit like emotional dark nights of the soul and emotional midpoints and developments and arcs. They both follow that structure in a different way, and so that was kind of a mess to organize, but that was the first thing I did. Then the next part of making it exist is to actually write the first draft. So 3 of the books that I've written, I have just typed the first draft, most of them during a November, if you will. But recently I have started dictating. So the next thing I will do is I will dictate this novel. I will take the next like Save the Cat beat. I take that and then I break it down even more, sometimes in the same document, but sometimes I would literally, like, let's say I'm writing chapter 3 and the next thing that I need to write is the decision for my character. I will write like bullet points of what's gonna happen in this scene. I am definitely a planner, as you can see, but there's also a lot of discovery in that because sometimes a Save the Cat beat will be opening image. There's a robbery that both of my main characters are in. That's all the information that I have. That is a plan, right? But I don't know, where's the robbery happening? How many people are there? How does the robbery end? Does the person get arrested? Is there a shootout? Like, does she have her weapon with her? Is she on duty? Is she off duty? Like, what? So there is a lot of discovery that happens in there, but what I really love about having this Save the Cat outline situation is that I know what's coming next, and so that kind of helps me guide, like, how do I end this scene in a way that leads me to the next point in the plot, rather than just like ending wherever feels good and then it doesn't lead to anything. So it helps to keep the character's goal and motivation in mind as I'm doing that. I always know where I'm going. I also skipped a step. So the first thing I actually do is write the last scene first, for the same reason, for the reason that I like to always have somewhere to go. And I never like seeing a blank page. And so if you write the last scene first, there's always that at the end of the page. Pro tip. And honestly, that scene never ends up existing in the actual final draft of that book, but it helps to have some sort of like, this is what my characters will look like at the end of this book. And so I write that last scene. And often that changes as I'm writing. So then I go and I dictate, so I essentially speak out loud as the characters through the scenes. And I write the whole book that way. And that typically takes, last time it took 2 months. So it took November and December to do that. Yeah, I mean, I stick to my outline for the most part, but it is more of a bare bones outline. And I also have character development that I do while I'm outlining the book. Like, I'll take for sure my main characters and write out their backstory kind of in that discovery outlining stage, which I think is smart to do at that point because that often changes what happens in the book. So sometimes I'll start with characters, sometimes I'll start with plot, but often I'm doing them at the same time. So after it exists, the second step is to make it make sense. So typically it's recommended that you take a break from your book. Most of the time I'm working on 2 books at once, but not actively. Like, one will always be in a dormant stage. So maybe it's in the query trenches or it's sitting waiting. So for example, I took a break from Gas Station and went back and I did some copy and line edits for the wedding season. So I took a break and worked on something else. It can be a week break, it can be a month break. I do think it helps to like do something else, get invested in another story, whether that be like reading a whole new book series or writing a short story or binging a Netflix show or some other, it doesn't have to be Netflix, do whatever you want, but consuming or creating some other story, because it really helps you get perspective on your story, in my opinion. So from that point, the next thing that I do is read the book again. So because I've dictated the first draft, I am not editing that dictation. So it is essentially a block of unreadable text, which is very overwhelming. I do not recommend doing that if you are brand spanking new to writing a book. I would edit as you go. Like, and not edit, but like format, like add in periods and commas and parentheses and quotation marks, like do all of that as you're going if this is your first time. Because when I got back after the break and I see 96,000 words of blocked text. So for me, the next thing I do is I go ahead and start editing the book. If I had typed it by hand, the first thing I would do would be read the book. Just read it from beginning to end, and then read it again, but make notes of like, what do I want to shift? What do I want to change? Right, that's what I would recommend doing. But for me, I type my way through it. I pretty much take everything over to a new document, but I just add in like the correct spelling and punctuation and grammar and all of that. But I'm not really like actively rewriting the book. I'm transcribing it, is how I would say. I'm transcribing it from this big block of text to a readable document. And that's what I've done over the summer. I consider that to be draft 2. After I do that, it took like a month, 2 months actually, to do that. And I did sometimes get carried away and do a little bit of line editing, as we all do, it's fine. But my focus is not to like change things, it's to make clear what I have already written. So from there, what I do next is I print out the book and I read it. I don't read it all in one go. I probably should. Like, you can really, the next stage is identifying all of the issues. So I went through and I annotated, essentially trying to identify all of the problems. And for me, problems usually come from the crime, the plot, character development and motivation, or just like general plot holes that you didn't think of. And so I annotated based on the flaws that I anticipated the book to have. And that's what I would recommend. I don't think you should annotate exactly how I did unless you're writing the same book as me, which would be weird. So please let me know if that's the case. Read the book and make notes in a way that helps identify the problems that you have. A couple major things to look for are like, does it make sense on a whole? And I actually bring readers in at this point. Because I did that work of outlining it to Save the Cat before, I know that it relatively makes sense. And I brought in a few readers to help me figure out and solidify where are the problems. I would actually not recommend bringing in readers this early unless you feel like the book is in a really good place on the first draft. So I brought in readers in a really, really rough draft and had them help me figure out. This was after I had transcribed it from dictation, by the way. So I've already written it through twice at this point. And so I did that. And I annotated, and so then after I annotated, I made a big juicy list of all of the problems that I saw and all of the problem that those two readers saw. So after that, I categorize those issues into like big juicy problems, and then like things that I can fix that are like name inconsistencies or age inconsistencies or cut this sort of sentence is weird. Like, I categorized it by that, and then I did the work of figuring out how do I solve those major problems. So from there, once I figured out how do I solve all these problems that I've identified in the revision, I create a chapter by chapter revision guide. So I take all the problems that I have and then I read through the book again. And as I'm reading through, I read through chapter 1 and I think, okay, how do I solve the problems in this major book? Is there anything that I need to add or change in this chapter to fix that problem or to help solve that problem or to help solve that tone issue, you know? And so I make a list that has, you know, like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And in each list, I write down, here's what I need to add in this character to chapter 1. They actually don't know each other in chapter 1. Chapter 2, make them hate each other more, like things like that. And I go all the way through, and the process of annotating all the way through making this list, so I've not touched draft 3 yet. That whole process took 2 months. Yeah, 2 months to do that. It was also summer and busy, and it just depends. I also do write probably 5 times a week for at least an hour. So that kind of helps give you a scope. I make that big list, and then I start going and I fix all the small things first. Anything that's teeny tiny, I just go through and fix. And then I go through, this is what I'm doing right now. I go through each chapter and I do make a few line edits, but mostly because something I'm working on in this draft is tone. There's like quite a major tone shift that I want in certain areas of the book. And so the revision includes line editing because of the tone. You don't need to line edit in this stage. Just if you're following my process exactly, you just shove it in, right? Add in dialogue, add in plot points, delete things, whatever. So after that is when you have another decision to make. So either you can give it to beta readers, or I will be giving my book to more beta readers after this because I'm also line editing through it. If you're just going in and adding things and not smoothing it out, I would go through and smooth it out again and then give it over to beta readers, take a break from it, start something new. Then once you get the feedback from beta readers, implement any of that feedback that makes sense. At that point, okay, I say beta readers, I use the term beta reader and critique partner synonymously. They are not the same, but that's the readers that I have are critique partners actually. I just am so used to saying the word beta reader. So these are critique partners. These are people that are helpful constructively. So then you take those pieces, implement them back in. Once you have it where you want it, you can do another round of readers if you want. If you still feel like it doesn't make sense and you want to run it by somebody else, like do however many rounds of readers you want. And then from there, it's really a gut check of, do I feel like this book is where I want it to be? After readers have read it and they think it makes sense, and I've read it and edited it, does it make sense? That's the second stage. Does it make sense? Then we go into making it beautiful, which is gonna be a more thorough line edit. So I am going line by line all the way through this book. I'm not changing plot things anymore unless something pops up, which it always does. But I am reading line by line and I'm making sure, does this match tonally? Is this grammatically correct? Do I like the flow of this? Is this realistically how my character would think? Is there too much action? Is there whatever. The thing I'm really looking at is this balance between action, interiority, and dialogue. So interiority is like how the characters think about and process things. Dialogue is dialogue, and action is like a fight sequence. I walked to the door, she punched me in the face, right? So I'm looking at a balance between those things and seeing like, does this flow naturally? From there, I also do a copy edit. So this is starting to kind of go into making it right, but we'll get there in a moment. So I will literally have Word read aloud the book to me to catch typos, to catch flow things. That's all part of that line edit. That's making it beautiful, is really just line editing and tone editing. And you can bring in readers whenever you want, frankly, but that's that next stage for me. The last stage is making it right. So for me, making it right means making it ready for traditional publishers. So, or agents. I'm writing a query letter and I'm making sure that the book is the right amount of words. My book is 70,000 words. Is that industry standard? I'm looking at writing blurbs and making sure that like the book fits within the constraints of the genre that I have. Sometimes that can bring you to spirals, but it's fine. That can also include like grammar and punctuation and font. Are there page numbers? Is the font readable? Is there weird spaces? Like, is there like 4 blank pages in the middle of the book that you need to delete? Like, it's really cosmetic things where you're really not even looking at the words anymore. You're looking at the format, you're looking at the type of document it's in, you're looking at what you're wanting to do and making it right. So if you're indie publishing, that might be formatting the deb, that might be sending it to a copy editor, like it's making it right for whatever you're doing. So those are the 4 stages that I operate in. I have been talking for 30 minutes. And copy and line editing took me 3 months. That's so long. Oh my gosh. At the time I was also moving, so it would probably not take that much time, but like looking at every word of your 70,000, 100,000 word book takes so much longer than I thought it would. And it might just have been because the book was rougher than I thought it was. No, it takes, if I can tell you anything, it always takes longer than you think it does, in my experience. Maybe now that I'm better and I've done it more times, it will take less time. No, it's always gonna take a long time. So yeah, that is my process at the moment from beginning to end. Total, I don't actually know how long it takes total. I would say probably a full 1.5 years because I'm also working on other projects at the same time and working a full-time job and querying a different book and outlining a new. So like, to give you some quick facts, technically that is 5 drafts if you include copy editing and line editing, and no, 6 drafts if you include copy editing and line editing. I go through 2 different rounds of critique partners and 1 round of like vibe check beta reading, which is like my mom, to make sure that there's nothing super obvious that I'm missing at the end. Let me know how you do it. Am I insane? Let me know. Comment down below a green flower emoji and I will see you next time. Goodbye.